without further ado, let's give a warm virtual welcome to Brandon Evans. Brandon, over to you.
Oh, that was such a nice welcome. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can live up to that amazing intro.
I
But
was impressed by
really
your results and by your dedication to cloud security, and I thought it will be nice to make a brief presentation, because your achievements are by far bigger than what I presented.
Well, I really appreciate that, and you're making me blush, which is unfortunate because I just shaved my beard, so now it's a lot more noticeable than normal. But hey, everyone, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really happy to be here for your chapter of the CSA. As mentioned, I'll be presenting on multi-cloud data security, and this is featuring material from the new SEC 510 Cloud Security Controls and Mitigations. We have a new name for the course. So just FYI, it used to be called something else. Now it's called SEC 510 Cloud Security Controls and Mitigations. And it's really cool to be a part of this group here. I'm actually half Romanian and a quarter Polish. So I don't know how to speak any of the language. I've been to Krakow and I really like it. Hopefully one of these days I'll be able to go to Romania as well. But George is going to have to find a way to justify that. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the goals of data security, what we're trying to accomplish in general, and how we can accomplish this in the cloud. We'll talk a little bit about how you can share all sorts of data that should not be shared in the cloud using a combination of sort of hidden controls and what's called pre-signed URLs. Then we'll talk a little bit about data detection and loss prevention, which is something that a lot of people say can solve our woes here. And I would argue that the answer to that claim is not exactly. And then we'll have a workshop to prove this out. I think you'll really enjoy it, where we're going to be proving out both items 2 and 3. Then we'll talk a little bit about our findings, and I'll leave you with some resources and, of course, answer some questions. So let's talk about the goals of data security. So there's this really awesome tool that Frank Kim, who's the head of our cloud curriculum and leadership curriculum, put together called the Data Security Hierarchy of Needs. And the idea behind this is that you need to get the lower level rungs right before you can really implement the higher level rungs. So if you don't have discovery of your data, it's really hard to protect the data. If you don't have an encryption for your data, it's hard to mandate proper data access controls. And if you don't have that set up properly, there's not a whole lot of point to figuring out your data usage. I augmented this diagram by pairing it with all of the cloud services that we can use to accomplish these various goals. So on the data governance side, we don't really talk that much about data governance in my courseware because I'm very technical and I'm not really that interested in policy or compliance beyond what I have to. However, there are a lot of great tools that you can leverage in order to automate some of this governance. So once you've gotten to a certain point of maturity, you can use things like AWS config, Azure policy, and Google Cloud policy to make sure that your configuration matches your policies defined at the governance phase. But I would actually say that's probably the last step. You want to have the policy in place, then have some technical controls, and then lock those controls in with things like policy. The second rung, and one of the more important ones people would argue, is data protection, such as encryption, making sure we're storing it in a secure medium, etc. We talk a lot about this in SEC 510. My general opinion is that encryption is oftentimes used as a smokescreen to make it look like we're doing security properly, when in reality, we're actually not doing a whole lot by implementing encryption. I made a post recently that said something along the lines of focus on encryption keys, miss the forest for the trees. Because in the cloud, encryption keys, I would argue, are largely for compliance purposes, because the entire goal of encryption is to enforce data access. And there are better ways to implement data access controls in the cloud. And oftentimes encryption is implemented in such a way that it doesn't actually improve the data access portion of the diagram. So we have IAM services, identity and access management services, to help with data access. And we are going to also talk about cloud monitoring capabilities. That's a large part of this workshop. So we're going to be focusing our energy largely on the top two rungs, on sharing and data prevention and detection. But in the course, we cover the top three rungs, as well as some automation for the bottom rung. So, yep, these are the topics we're going to be covering today. So let's talk a little bit about unauthorized file sharing in the various cloud providers. So you're probably already familiar with the storage services in the cloud providers. We have AWS S3, otherwise known as the Simple Storage Service. We have Azure Storage and Google Cloud Storage. And there are multiple ways to share these files in these storage services that are potentially inappropriate. Before we get into that, I just want to highlight how many other mechanisms you can use in AWS to share data inappropriately. It's really not just about storage, but it's also about all of these other items. There are so many items that there's this tool called AWS Prowler, and this is more or less a configuration auditing tool. And it has an entire module surrounding all the things that can be inappropriately shared in AWS. It's possible to make snapshots of your disks public, your images public. There's so many things you can make public or share with specific AWS accounts. And none of that goes through the storage services, which makes it a little bit harder to detect when something like this has gone wrong. In fact, you won't see any of this in your flow logs or your network logs either, because if you make a snapshot public, it can be downloaded outside of your network. People can just add it from their account, and there would not be any traffic that you can see that would be generated. So there's a whole lot of things that can go wrong in AWS. In Google Cloud, it's not quite as bad. There are a couple of things that you can share outside of files, but not a whole lot. But one thing I want to share with you, just for a fun side note, is that one of the principles that you can share your various resources with in Google Cloud is called all authenticated users. And when you see the term all authenticated users, you might think that is anyone who is currently logged in to your Google workspace. So someone that is a part of your corporate identity system. Unfortunately, that is not the case at all. All authenticated users means anyone who is logged in with a Google account. Who here has a Google account? A Gmail account? Basically everybody on the planet. I know that there are literal babies that have Gmail accounts so that their parents can sign them up for various things and use the app stores, for example. So this actually does not prove anything about the user. And in my personal opinion, you should never use this principle. If you want to make something public, just grant it to all users, because the name all authenticated users gives you a false sense of security and actually adds zero value. So there's a couple other items you could share in Google Cloud, such as BigQuery datasets, but not nearly as much as with AWS. And then in Azure, really everything is centralized around the Azure storage service. Basically, anything that you want to share is backed by Azure Storage. So for example, there's the same path for sharing virtual machine images as there is for sharing files. And that means that you can really focus your energy on protecting Azure Storage, and the side effect will be everything else will be relatively well protected. But there's still this capability in Azure Storage called shared access signatures, or SAS tokens. And these can be leveraged in order to share files with an external user simply by giving them a URL. And this can be done for virtual machine images as well. So here's what that looks like. So you can create a shared access signature with a command like this, And this is going to designate that you want to bind this to a particular storage account, that you want to set this up for a particular container and a particular object. And you can also set the permissions to be not only read, but also writable. So you can do all sorts of things with these shared access signatures. Now you might be thinking, oh, this is not a problem because I've done various things to block access to my storage. I am aware of many different configurations that I can use to make it so that storage is inaccessible. So I'm good, right? Well, that's not the case. And the reason why that is all of the protections that you're almost certainly using prevent public access. When you're using a shared access signature, you are not accessing files without authentication. What you're doing is you are pre-authenticating. Someone who is already logged in is going to generate a signature. That signature can be used for authentication purposes, and all they're doing is taking the signature generated by their login and handing it to someone else. So that someone else is effectively getting the file as the person who created the shared access signature. So many of the capabilities that you use will be useless in this particular context. Now, this is not just an Azure issue. This issue exists for AWS and Google Cloud as well. The reason why this is so important in Azure Storage, however, is because Azure Storage is the main exfiltration path. So that means that it's really important to focus on this because everything goes through Azure Storage. There was a recent study, or a recent case study, I should say, that happened that was really funny. I don't really want to say that a breach is funny, but it is very humorous, where the Microsoft AI team actually used a shared access signature in a way that was devastatingly impermissible. It allowed way, way too much access. The story behind this is that Microsoft's AI team wanted to get in on the trend of generative AI. Everybody wants to do generative AI. And as a result, they created a shared access signature for, so you could download these AI models from GitHub by using this shared access signature. However, the shared access signature was not bound to a specific container of AI models. Instead, it was bound to the entire storage account. And this storage account contained employee backups. That's right, backups of employee workstations. So think about the amount of credentials that you have on your workstation in some fashion, in your keychain, in various chat platforms, in code, unfortunately. The attacker would be able to take all of that information and probably pivot throughout the entirety of Microsoft. And the reason why this is so funny to me, as sad as it is as well, is because this shows that even Microsoft can use Microsoft Azure wrong. If you think that you've got a handle on your usage of Azure, remember that Microsoft made a huge mistake with their own service. Now, granted, Microsoft's a huge organization. It's not like everyone there is an Azure subject matter expert, but it's still a really bad look. The good news is that this was not exploited to our knowledge. This was reported before it was exploited, but it was pretty sad and also, again, kind of humorous. So let's talk a little bit now about how we can detect when our data is being taken out of our accounts, as well as how we can detect sensitive data in our cloud providers. So there's this tool called Amazon Macie, and Amazon Macie is what a lot of people say is going to save the day when it comes to sensitive data problems. One of the reasons I created this workshop is because during a teach that I was doing, I asked the audience, why are reasons why we wouldn't want to encrypt our data? I make the argument that everybody should encrypt all of their data in the cloud. And I ask them, in your opinion, what is an example of why you would not want to encrypt data in the cloud? And they said, oh, it's because we have data in the cloud that we know is not sensitive. Okay, that's a reasonable argument. If the data is not sensitive, if it's public data, sure, you don't need to encrypt it. But how confident are you that you know where all of your sensitive data is in your environment? Human beings are terrible at classifying data. Computers are not that much better. So in my opinion, it is much better to leverage encryption and access control than just assuming that a service like Amazon Macy, which does data detection, is going to find all of your sensitive data because it has false positives, false negatives, and it's also very expensive. And you're going to see this firsthand in your workshop. You will see how it is unable to detect a lot of really sensitive data. I'm not saying that Amazon Macy is a useless tool by any means, but I will tell you that it is not the end-all be-all solution by any means either. In addition, oh, one thing before I forget, Macy also only works with S3. When I first talked to someone about Macy, I thought that it was for all sorts of services. I thought that this was Amazon's data loss prevention tool. And unfortunately, no, it's not. It only works with S3. It only finds sensitive data. And it's very bad at finding certain types of sensitive data, especially in the context of internationalization. So it's not able to find names with special characters that are not Latin. In addition, and that's by their documentation. In addition, I've noticed that it's very bad at finding names that are not common in the United States. So if you're working in organizations globally, which I know you all are, this is going to be a fairly useless tool for finding sensitive names being stored in clear text in your environment. But hey, it's a tool in your toolbox. As long as you don't depend on it excessively, maybe it's useful. To be determined and to be determined by your organization. In addition, Macy does have some auditing capabilities that you can look at, like telling you when you're using shared access signatures inappropriately, how well you're applying encryption, how many objects are publicly accessible. And while this is cool, this is also elsewhere in the platform. So the reason I believe that they added this auditing console into Macy is simply because it makes the service look more feature rich than it is. It's really a pretty simple service. And it claims to use AI and ML. Of course, it claims to do AI, ML. Everybody wants to use AI, ML. I strongly doubt that their AI or ML is particularly sophisticated, especially based on the findings you're going to see in this workshop. Google also has a DLP solution, which does a little bit more than Macy does. In general, I make fun of Google Cloud a lot. It has a lot of problems on the security side, but I think that they have a really solid product offering here when it comes to data loss prevention. Not only can it find sensitive data in more than just one data source, it supports arbitrary API integration. And I think that's pretty cool because it might be useful to have something in your software that says, hey, this user entered PII, personally identifiable information, in a place that it shouldn't be entered. And this is something that I learned a long time ago, is that anytime you give a user a text box, you cannot predict what they're going to put in there. You have no idea whether or not a text box is PII. Anytime a user can type whatever they want, you have to treat it as PII. And I like the idea of using something like Google Cloud DLP as a first line of defense so that you would not be able to, for example, upload your bank account information into a chat platform, just as an example. And it also supports some data de-identification mechanisms, such as masking, encryption, and redaction. There's also Azure Information Protection and something called Microsoft Purview. That's going to be outside of the scope of this particular workshop because I'll tell you folks, I could not figure out how to get access to this. Their pricing plans are so wild, and I'm sure you're used to that dealing with Microsoft. But it seems like their suite of tools with Azure Information Protection and Microsoft Purview go well beyond the scope of just Azure. So just be aware that those tools exist out there, but that'll be out of scope for our actual workshop. So that brings us to our workshop where we're going to be actually experimenting with these tools. Before we get into that, are there any questions about what I presented thus far? Any questions at all? All right.
Not for now.
Okay. Awesome. Well, hopefully we'll generate some as in the process of doing the workshop.
Any questions at all?
All right.
Not for now.
All right. If there are no questions.
Hopefully we'll generate some as the.
Oh, I think that someone has the recording playing in the background.
Any questions at all?
There's some feedback on your end. Okay. I think there was some feedback on your end. I could hear my own voice. Okay, cool. If there are no questions, that will bring us to the workshop itself. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to paste the instructions for the workshop in the Zoom chat. So the Zoom chat contains the link to the workshop. And when you navigate to this, you will see all of the instructions that are required in order to do the workshop. We have the next 2.5 hours to spend together. And what we're going to do is probably do the workshop for about 2 hours and 15 minutes, maybe a little bit less than that. And then we're going to come back and we're going to do a little bit of a debrief and have some additional questions. So there's going to be 2 portions of this workshop. We're going to have a portion for the data sharing side and also for the data detection side. Some things to note as we get started with this is that this workshop will require you to have your own cloud accounts. We have to create new ones for this account, for this workshop. Make sure you do not do this workshop in a production environment because, like all of our other labs, I do not want to be responsible for getting you all into trouble with a production environment. So create some kind of lab account for this, and we'll show you the exact instructions on how to do this in the workshop material. It may take some time for it to be approved. I doubt it's going to take any significant time, but just letting you know, it's possible that there will be a delay, and I'm going to keep this workshop online for quite some time. Hopefully no one's going to have any problems with this. There might be some slight charges associated with doing the workshop, unfortunately. They should be very, very, very minuscule, like a few dollars tops, and hopefully your organization can reimburse you for these lab environments for research purposes. One of the things that's very annoying about working in the cloud providers is it's very hard to do research for free, unfortunately. But hopefully you won't have any major expenditures, and we'll also show you how to get rid of those resources at the end. And with that, folks, I'm going to share this a couple of times in the Zoom chat because I know that there are people that are jumping in pretty consistently, and the Zoom chat doesn't persist. So I'm going to share it every once in a while. But with that, folks, we can begin on the workshop. So I hope that you'll enjoy this. I hope that you'll really learn a whole lot in the process. I will go off camera and off mic, but I will be monitoring the Zoom chat during this entire time. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. And I will see you all in around, let's say, 2 hours and 15 minutes. So we'll come back at 2 hours and 15 minutes. We'll have a 15-minute debrief and Q&A session, and that'll be the workshop. So let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you'll enjoy.
It's clear for everyone, like for the next steps. So Brandon has kindly given us an intro on cloud and multi-cloud security, and he has gone through the effort of putting together a detailed step-by-step guide on the hands-on part of this workshop, which he dropped in the chat. So as next steps, each and everyone who wants to continue with this hands-on part should go in it, go step by step, and we are waiting in standby in case there are any potential issues that we might need to debug. And once this this workshop ends, like the hands-on part ends, we will reconvene again at the end of the countdown timer Brandon provided to debrief, to discuss on how it went, and other stuff like that. So I hope that this is clear for everyone, and hope that the workshop is as engaging as we imagined it to be for you. So see you in 2 hours.
George, just a moment.
Yep.
It's Graziella. Sorry for
Hi.
the background noise. Just wanted to confirm with you. So the next 2 hours is like an individual work, following the detailed instructions Brandon put together, and we will meet together again for having a conversation based on individual experience. Is that correct?
Yes, Brandon, can you confirm?
Yes, we'll do a quick debrief of the event. So we'll talk about some of the things that we learned in the workshop, and then I will be more than happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay. Thank you
FYI,
very much.
clear. This is a short immersion in what the lab part in what some of our courses are. So hang in there. Like,
okay.
persist.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
We
our
are here to help.
labs, learning from experience and from trial and error is so important. It can be difficult at times, but getting your hands on and actually seeing how these services work is the only real way to know that they're actually working the way they're advertised.
Okay, now it's clear. Thank you very much.
Of course. Let me know if you have any questions about the instructions. All right. Thank you so much for those who have stuck around till this point. I really hope that you've enjoyed the workshop, and it'll be available at the link that I provided for the indefinite future. So if you haven't finished it, please do take the opportunity to check it out if you haven't already. So, and yes, George, my timer is a little ahead, but let's just leave 20 minutes for it instead of 15, just in case. Hopefully that was roughly enough time for folks to finish. I hope that 5 minutes will make a huge difference. All right. So let's do a quick debrief on what we've talked about thus far. So in this workshop, we determined that Macie and Google Cloud DLP has differing capabilities. Macie is only able to scan S3, whereas Google Cloud can scan much more, including storage BigQuery, Cloud Data Store, and most importantly, it can scan external data. So we can have any kind of API-based integration that we'd like to create those, what they call privacy-aware applications, where we can determine that an application is taking in PII and reject that data from going into our systems, for example. Both of them support custom identifiers. You may remember from the workshop that there was a very sensitive type of data in the US medical system that was being exposed in these buckets. And while they are not PII by themselves, when coupled with your name, they're very serious because they disclosed what kind of physical or mental illness that you had. So the disease codes by themselves were not significant, but when bound to an individual, it's basically exposing their medical history. Another thing that you may have noticed that may have been very frustrating to you is you may have noticed that these are CSV files and they have headings in each of the columns. So you would think that the column labeled name would be detected as a name, even if Macy did not understand that each and every individual one of those names is a normal name. However, unfortunately, that is not the case. There was no ability for it to get context from the headings of the columns. So we have to understand that these are relatively simplistic, not particularly nuanced tools that will definitely not find all of your PII in your system, much less in S3. AWS has config auditing in their user interface. Google has that too, just not in that service in particular. And similarly, AWS does not have any data loss prevention capabilities in that UI. There are other DLP capabilities that we could have talked about, but we only have 3 hours for a workshop, just not in that UI, whereas Google Cloud DLP has more centralized DLP capabilities. From a data exfiltration path perspective, we learned that AWS has more exfiltration paths than Google Cloud, which also has more exfiltration paths than Azure. Most Azure data comes from Azure storage. And as a result, if we have good Azure storage best practices, it's unlikely that our data is going to be exfiltrated in the ways that we showed off in this workshop. So with that, we're going to have some additional resources that I'm going to leave with you with, as well as we'll have our Q&A session, if there are any questions. Firstly, I want to direct you to the secure service configuration in AWS, Azure, and GCP poster. In our course, we have a lot of these comparison tables, just like the one I showed you earlier with Macy and Google Cloud DLP. We have so many of these comparison tables, and all of them are featured on the AWS, Azure, and GCP poster that I'm referencing here. So you can use that as a quick reference. You can either use the digital version of it, or you can use the physical version of it if you print it out. I have mine right over here, actually. There's quite a lot of data on here, as you can see. Or maybe you can't see because of the virtual background. But there's a lot of good stuff here that hopefully you'd enjoy. And you can find this on sans.org/cloud. For those who are new to SANS, SANS is pretty expensive, but it also is very high value. And one thing that I'm really happy about regarding SANS is that we take the resources that we get and use them to subsidize a lot of great free research. So we give away so many free resources on sans.org/cloud, as well as sans.org/free. So if you're not taking advantage of those free resources, I think you're leaving a lot on the table. And I want you all to get the most value as possible from the research that I have put together, as well as many other people have put together. We also have the multi-cloud command line cheat sheet. We didn't do a whole lot with cloud commands in this particular lab, but we have a lot of commands that we use within other labs and workshops that we have here at SANS. And if you want to learn how to write more of your own commands, We have a cheat sheet, which once again, you could use digitally or print out like this one. We have a podcast that we run called the Cloud Ace Podcast, where you can listen to experts in the field that we have interviewed. I hosted the first season of it, and you can subscribe to it on Spotify, on Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, free. Hopefully you take advantage of it. We have a couple of survey reports that we've done recently that I think you might find interesting related to this. So we have one that talks about multi-cloud trends, how organizations are picking up more and more cloud providers. We also have 2 ebooks about from this event called the SANS Cloud Security Exchange, where we collaborated with people in AWS, Azure, and GCP to talk about cloud trends. Finally, very quickly, if you like this workshop, I really think you'd like to check out Sec 510 Cloud Security Controls and Mitigations. This was one very small part of that course, and we've had a lot of students, a lot of great reviews. We've got, I think, over 1,000 people that have taken the course and have gotten the certification. And here are some of their testimonials, which we are very honored to have. Specifically for this audience, because I assume that most of you are in Europe, given that this is a local chapter in Romania, we have a couple of events coming out in Europe. I'll be in London in 3 weeks teaching the course. I'll also be in Munich teaching it in June. And regardless of where you are, we are always teaching the course on demand. So that's where you can take the course at your own pace. At your own pace, you could watch the videos, follow the labs, and get real support from TAs that we call our subject matter experts, because they are real practitioners in the field who have the certification. So even if you take it on your own, if you take it on demand at your own pace, you will still get that same level of support. And with that, I'm going to open it up to any Q&A that you might have. Any questions at all? Did you have fun with the workshop? Paul says, what tools are you using to assess cloud security? My area of focus is mostly on the cloud native tools. So I like to use some tools like the various ones in Security Hub for AWS, as well as Microsoft Defender for Cloud and the Google Cloud Command Center. There are a lot of great third-party tools that you may want to take a look at. One of which I'm a huge fan of is Cloud Custodian, because Cloud Custodian can not only find issues, but also remediate them, which can be risky at times because you're changing production potentially, but could also be advantageous because it's better to prevent the problem in the first place than to react. There are many other tools that are worth looking into. One of the frameworks that I would look into is the Center for Internet Security benchmarks. There's a benchmark for all 3 of the big 3 cloud providers, and there are so many things that you can do to harden your environment using those steps, as well as many tools that can check your environment against those things. At the same time, though, recognize that these benchmarks are largely asking yes or no questions about your environment. Yes, you have a bucket that's public. No, you don't have a bucket that's public, which misses some of the more nuanced things like, is this IAM policy appropriate for your organization, which is very business and organization contextual. Thank you for your question. Any other questions? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I guess would you like to wrap up?
Yep. Do you have a slide also with your contact details if anyone
Yes.
wants to reach out?
Excellent. Yes. You can follow me on X at Brandon Max Evans. I would recommend against doing that because I'm not much of an X user anymore, and I should probably just replace this with my LinkedIn. You can connect with me or follow me on my LinkedIn, which I'll post in the chat. And I post a lot on LinkedIn about a variety of topics, including data security, but much, much more. Recently, I've been talking a lot about the difficulties of supporting multiple cloud providers. It's way harder than people realize. So you may want to check out some of the posts that I make there. I have a big post coming out soon that I am not really supposed to talk about too much, but I recently, for the first time ever, won a bug bounty, and I'll be posting about that bug bounty once it is responsible to disclose it. But I'm so psyched to talk to you about that, hopefully in the not far future.
Hope it will contain some nice memes.
Nice memes. Oh, George, I'm gonna have to send you. I actually have prepared a picture for this. I'm gonna send it to you on LinkedIn. No details are exposed from this image. Can I paste this in Zoom? I wonder if I could paste this in Zoom. It's ridiculous. Yep. I photoshopped this picture this morning to represent the achievements. So maybe you get a
I
kick
like
out
the
of that.
pixelated one, the pixelated pic.
Yeah, I couldn't it would be much harder for me to Photoshop my actual face on top of a cartoon character. But yeah, the hardest thing was getting rid of the text and replacing it with the new text. But soon I will expose who I was battling, who I have compromised, but not today.
Looking forward to your post. Thank you very much.
Most certainly. I love to have fun. Security is fun. If you're not having fun, you're not learning. So I really appreciate you all for attending this. I really appreciate all the hard work you do in this industry. And if you ever want to reach out for any reason on LinkedIn, you are absolutely welcome to do so. And hopefully I'll see you at a SANS event in the not far future.
Or in Romania, I'm working on it.
I really want to go to Romania, George. Get me there, please. I want to go to Bucharest. I have, I think I know some of the cities that my family's associated with, and it'd be cool to visit them if possible.
We'll make it happen.
Awesome.
See you soon.
All right. All right. I guess I'll drop then unless there are any final words.
Thank you very much, Brandon, for this amazing workshop. So I hope our audience enjoyed every single second of it and learned and kept the value of security as it should be within their hearts and minds and daily working. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for having me. Incredible that you have this level of audience so early in your chapter's existence. I mean, seriously, I assumed based on the attendance we had in the beginning that this was at least several years old. So congratulations for fostering such a great community.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care, folks. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.